Hello, I'm Rob Westervelt, Editor-in-Chief of IHS Chemical Week, and welcome to the 2014 IHS Chemical World Petrochemical Conference. And I'm delighted to be joined by Jim Fitterling, Executive VP with Dow Chemical.
How you doing, Rob?
Jim, thanks for taking time here. Question related to your presentation today. You outlined the investment surge based on new energy supplies in North America, talking about that it's obviously some big numbers out there already, but Dow has looked at it and the numbers could be bigger than anyone expected. And what led you to that view, and can you give a sense of just how big this buildup could be?
Sure. I think there were a couple of things that were covered today. I think Bill Sanderson did a nice job on the energy outlook, and I think people are starting to understand just how competitive the American energy situation is and how much available energy is there. A lot based on natural gas, obviously, oil as well, but a lot based on natural gas. And that's driven a lot of the investment, obviously, in the first wave of the production wave that we saw. And as I mentioned, API said that there was going to be as much as $5.1 trillion invested in production of energy in the United States between now and 2035, including the last several years that we've seen the big buildup. And in our industry today, there are almost 120 announced projects: petrochemicals, chemicals, steel, fertilizer, glass even, big energy-intensive industries coming back into the United States. And of those, almost 60% now, ACC reports, almost 60% of those are foreign direct investment. And of course, these are countries that are not energy competitive today coming to source manufacturing in the United States to take advantage of this energy. As we all know, there's the big discussion about LNG exports, and not that we believe that it won't happen. We believe some will. But the reality is exported LNG to another country isn't going to make another country competitive with the United States. What has made us competitive here is horizontal drilling and fracking and the ability to get energy out of the ground more cost effectively. And that's what's pulling the industry in. So we have to remember a couple of things on this energy competitiveness. It's always been one of America's key advantages. And that's not only true for the chemicals industry, that's true for a lot of industries. And so it's an advantage that we don't need to play lightly with. It's also changed our energy footprint quite dramatically, and I talked about the fact that it's not a transition fuel anymore. In fact, we always looked at coal as a baseload fuel for electricity in the US, and nuclear was a baseload fuel for electricity, and gas was a transition fuel or a bridge fuel. It was usually a peaking fuel used to help us out in summertime, wintertime, but then you would transition to more of a baseload fuel. Actually, gas is now taking up such a position in electricity generation that it's becoming a baseload fuel. And so America needs to look at this differently. If we want to maintain that competitive advantage, we have to watch what we do with our gas, and we have to watch what value we get out of it. Because what energy uncompetitiveness will do, we can start to see in Europe today. It will undercut the entire manufacturing and technology rebirth. And then the wave of investments is coming after the petrochemical investments. We're starting to see downstream investments, obviously in big industries that are here and never left, like automotive. So in the plastics business, you'll see a lot of compounders and converters continue to grow in the automotive sector. Last October in Dusseldorf at the K Fair, the equipment manufacturers for plastics conversion would tell you that was the biggest year they've had in 10 years in terms of equipment sales for plastics conversion. And the equipment builders here in the United States, Bill Carto talked about the other day the fact that the equipment converters here have increased their number of sales and their production to support all the plastics conversion in the US. So we're seeing that wave of investment coming now. That could be $80 to $120 billion worth of additional investments and output from the United States. And then a whole wave of other industries. As labor costs have risen in China, you're now starting to see people that are making products for Apple, Lenovo, computers, appliances, and maybe even furniture manufacturers coming back into the United States because they have competitive cost positions.
Okay. And as you look at this wave of investment, how important is being an early mover, not necessarily a first mover, but how tight could the situation get in the U.S. over the next 3 or 4 years?
Well, I think two things in terms of being an early mover that help. One is the costs on the construction and the labor force and getting in early with that. The second is getting tied in and getting your infrastructure built out quickly. The infrastructure that was existing today, to build incrementally off that infrastructure has one cost. To build brand new infrastructure to tie into this is going to be more expensive. So I think as the first 4 or 5, and I mentioned today that on ethane crackers there are 10 announced, and I think there'll probably be 6 that'll start up in the 2017 to 19 timeframe. The early ones are going to have a big advantage. As you move later on, competitive pressures are going to start to stretch out the timeline on that. And there may be 10 built here. I just don't think that there'll be 10 built by the 2019 timeframe. That'll probably take a longer timeframe to happen.
Okay. And in your discussion about investment waves, you identified 4 waves, including some waves that people are just starting to think about around, the downstream customers and the return of knowledge-based industries. And how does Dow see that playing out over the next few years? What does it mean for the industry, and what does it mean for the broader economy?
I think 2 things on the knowledge-based industries. One is around intellectual property. Obviously, that's driving a lot of that move back. A lot of that business went offshore because the labor costs were too high. Labor costs have changed pretty dramatically in those industries, and so China costs have come up. American productivity is still very strong, and American IP and American technical know-how is still very strong. So I think you see a balance moving on, and obviously probably some political pressures on some of those brand owners to not make everything in China and to bring some of that back into the U.S. But secondly, this energy competitiveness situation can't be overlooked. Even though China has built a lot of capacity over this last decade, a lot of that capacity is not globally competitive today, and the U.S. is. And so I think that's another huge fundamental for our industry into why our downstream converters and downstream customers are going to move here. And then, as you mentioned, your team mentioned today, a brand owner and a retailer like Walmart saying that we're going to source $50 billion of products that are American-made. That's a real incentive for producers to come back into the States.
Okay. And final question around what are the risks or the potential speed bumps that you see for these coming investment waves?
Well, I talked today about the fact that STEM workers, educated workers, is a real risk. It's one that the industry, I think, is tackling, but it's one that takes time. It takes time to get people educated and get up to the level that we need in the industry. And it isn't just college graduates, although we see the enrollment up in engineering schools. It's also skilled workers, very specialized workers, could be rotating equipment, could be specialized welders for the construction part of the process and the maintenance part of the process. And we see that demand too. So the trade schools and the technical schools and the community colleges have all ramped up curriculum. That requires a lot of help of the industry to define that curriculum, to show the community colleges what type of skills do we need, what type of systems do we work with, and they actually have to help set up the labs and set up the hands-on training that they can do. And then I think the biggest issue that we have is with a decade of chemical jobs leaving, this is the first year since 1999 that our employment in the chemical industry has increased. With a decade of chemical jobs leaving, we have to take these kids and show them what it means to work in the chemical industry, what their vision is of working in our industry, and what reality is may be very different. And when you go into a modern petrochemical manufacturing facility today, it looks very different than a facility did 20 years ago. And so their vision, you need to show them the kind of work that they're going to be doing and show them the kind of problems that they're going to be solving. It could be food problems, it could be energy problems, it could be clean water problems. These are also very appealing careers for students to undertake. The amount of people that work in the chemical industry today working on environmental issues are many, many times what they were 20 years ago. And I think students don't have an appreciation for